Renewed effort from the state's top prosecutors. Solicitors are asking state legislators to prioritize a bill that they say could help more children get justice. Fox Carolina's Grace Runkel's followed this piece of legislation for the last year now. She's joining us, breaking down the latest push to expand South Carolina's homicide by child abuse law.
It's a gap in the law not a lot of people want to think about. How do you prosecute a parent when they're responsible for their child's death? Right now in South Carolina, it really depends on that child's age. And if they're older than 11, it may be a lot harder for prosecutors to secure a guilty verdict.
The public doesn't realize how many children we have at risk.
South Carolina solicitors are calling on the state legislature to take action.
Let's get it passed.
8th Circuit Solicitor David Stumbo says 2025 needs to be the year they expand South Carolina's homicide by child abuse law. Now the law says a person is guilty if they cause the death of a child while committing abuse or neglect. The key part of the law is the age. It only applies when the victim is under 11. If they are older, then it turns into a homicide case. And that means the prosecution has to prove to a juror the crime was done with intention. In the legal world, this is called malice aforethought.
There is an element of intent. There's an intentionality to the killing. It's a lot harder to prove that in these abuse or neglect cases.
It's a problem Stumbo ran into a few months ago, the case of Ashante Glenn.
It's always terribly sad when somebody who has not had the opportunity to get to experience the fullness of life loses their life at such a young age.
The 12-year-old died May 2022. The coroner says she suffered trauma to her throat, causing her to inhale blood and develop pneumonia.
It's really sad that this little girl lost her life in such a tragic way.
Her mother and stepfather were charged with homicide, but in October this year pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and unlawfully placing a child at risk instead. Stumbo says after reviewing the case, they found it would be too difficult to prove to a juror the couple's actions were intentional. They received the max sentence, but they'll spend a little less than 8 years behind bars.
What weighs on me as a prosecutor, and I believe, Ashante was we felt like after we worked this case, we knew Ashante by the end of it, a sweet little girl that lost her life.
2 bills have already been pre-filed for the upcoming legislative session, both proposing to increase the age from 11 to 18. Last year, 3 were introduced. One even passed the Senate, but sat untouched in the House. At the time, we sat down with the 7th Circuit Solicitor, Barry Barnett.
These are cases that are totally preventable. I mean, they should never happen. And obviously, when somebody does something this horrific, they need to be held responsible for it.
An issue he brought up in court just months ago.
I wish we had homicide and child abuse statute, but we don't. Our legislature has not passed that.
The trial, the murder of Heather Baynard, a case similar to Ashante's. Heather was 14 years old when she died in 2022, but because of her various medical conditions, had the brain development of an infant. The coroner said it was the worst case of child neglect he'd ever seen. Her mother, father, and adult brother were charged with murder. At the trial, their defense attorneys tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing the state couldn't prove they intended to kill Heather. Barnett saying this to the judge.
But murder to me fits in this case because the willfulness in this situation is the willfulness that let her watch it deteriorate over this period of time.
The jury agreed, and all 3 were found guilty of murder. But appeals have already been filed in the mother and brother's cases.
It would have been a slam dunk case for the solicitor had it been a homicide by child abuse.
The next legislative session starts on January 14th. We'll be following these bills very closely and let you know about their progress. Grace Runkel, Fox Carolina News.